Today I thought I would make a family favorite, which is homemade egg noodles. I don't know where you're from that you're watching, but here in the Midwest, a family favorite for most of the holidays is egg noodles. Chicken and egg noodles or beef and egg noodles, and that's what I'm going to make today. A lot of times we make them and we like to put them over mashed potatoes or even just make a chicken and noodles or beef and noodles soup. But today I'm just going to make the noodles and show you the process how I make our old family recipe, the Plank family recipe egg noodles. So what I have here is a whole dozen eggs, and you heard that right. I use a whole dozen eggs for this recipe that was passed to me. And the ratio that I have is 5 whole eggs right here and 7 yolks right there. And I took my whites from the yolks and I'm going to put them in a jar and freeze them and use them later on for something else. So I've got that right there. And let me put a lid on that. And I'll put those up. And all I'm going to do is put my eggs in the bowl. And what I did is I let these eggs come up to room temperature. Otherwise, they're just like really cold to work with once you start to knead out the dough. So I'm going to put my eggs in the bowl. In my stand mixer. And let me move this so you can see. Okay. Scrape those out. And you might ask, why so many yolks? It gives it such a rich flavor, which is what we want with these egg noodles. In the bright orange color. I know there's some people who make them and they only put maybe a couple eggs, and some even put food coloring to give it that rich color. Well, with so many yolks, you don't have to add that to give that rich color to it. And obviously it gives it a much richer flavor having all the yolks in it. Now, calories and cholesterol, they're not even a factor in this because you might as well figure there's a lot in it. But, you know, when you're looking at a Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, Easter, any, the main holidays that you might celebrate wherever you're at, calories are not a factor, or cholesterol, unless you're really watching it and you have to watch it, which in that case, then this definitely would not be something on your list that you'd want to eat. But that's not what we're doing here. I'm just showing you how to make our family favorite egg noodles. So I've got all 12 eggs in my stand mixer. I'm going to use the paddle attachment. And I've got a teaspoon and a half of salt that I'm going to go ahead and add in there, which flavors it and also helps dry it and also helps preserve it. Because if you let your noodles dry completely before you bag them up, the salt helps preserve them and makes them more stable, and they'll last longer. Now, me personally, I store these in the freezer. I know a lot of egg noodle recipes that you can let them dry completely and they're shelf stable. This one being that it has so many eggs in it, I don't know that you could, dry it completely and make it shelf stable. If you have experience with that, by all means, leave it in the comments below, because that would be a great option to have shelf stable noodles, because I know that obviously you can buy noodles in the store. But like I said, just the ratio of eggs in this one, I don't know that you could. So, but I'm all open for, new thoughts on that. So I'm going to go ahead and blend up my eggs. Alrighty. Those are beat pretty good. And I'm going to add 3 cups of flour to start. And right here, what I'm just doing with my stand mixer, that I used to do by hand, I would make a well in a bowl with the flour, and then just start folding in your flour, which, works just fine because they haven't always had stand mixers. Back in the day, that's all they had was to do it by hand. But it's easier to get more of a texture that you're looking for with a stand mixer. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to add 1. I'm going to let that blend. And the idea is just to get it to where it's a nice formed ball. And then I'm going to pour it out on a surface with flour on it, and then just start kneading in the flour to get it to a nice soft ball that can be worked and kneaded until it's dry and kind of bounces back. Not super dry because you still want some moisture to it, but to where it bounces back, and then you can start rolling it out. All right, and I'm going to add one more. And I think I'm going to start to add one more cup, but I'm not going to add the whole cup. I'm going to add a little bit of it and see how it looks. I've often wondered what it would happen if my if my spatula got mixed up in there, but now I'm thinking I don't know that I want to know that, especially as it gets caught on it. Okay, let's do the rest of that fourth cup. That'll start to come together pretty nicely. I think I'm going to go ahead and turn that out on my counter because it's getting pretty sticky and I don't want to tear up my mixer as that gluten starts to activate with the moisture of the eggs. Nope. You can see it's pretty sticky, but that's what we want. These are not hard to make at all. They are maybe a little time consuming and take your muscle as you knead them and roll them out. But as far as hard, they're really not hard to make at all. As you can see, my hands are already getting me. Trying to get this dough off. Because it's a pretty sticky dough. Alrighty. Oh goodness, let's just didn't have to take that off, it came off. All right, now I'll show you what this looks like. Maybe. As you see, like I said, it's a very sticky dough. I'm gonna move this out of my way so I got a decent surface to work with. This is one of those things that is definitely a labor of love because it takes muscle to do it and really just time. Okay. Definitely be working in a lot of extra flour, so let me grab another cup. I'm just going to start scraping that off the edges. definitely thankful for plastic gloves. They make life so much easier. I remember way back in the day, I would make these without gloves because I didn't have any, and my hands would be just caked in flour and egg. Then you just roll your hands into dry flour and work the stuff off of it. But this is definitely much better. Okay. I hate to leave all that behind in there, but it just sticks pretty good. Yeah, good as it's going to get. All right, and then the rest, you just gotta keep kneading and working flour into it till you get a nice springy texture on the outside. And every time you turn it, you're not getting wet egg in it, and it's not sticking to everything. Now, when you're working this, you don't want it super dry. You don't want it sticking, but you don't want it super dry, because as you roll it out with the flour, you're gonna work more flour into your dough. Okay. Now it's starting to get springy, which is just how you want it to be, as those gluten strands in the flour start to become more sticky. Like I said, it's not hard. It's just a labor of love because it takes muscle. And I'm going to roll these out the old-fashioned way because I don't have a noodle maker, which is obviously on the list of to-do things, is to get a noodle attachment to my KitchenAid. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I should be able to start rolling that out and then just working flour into it as I go. As I roll it out, as I get a sticky spot, I'll just put flour on it and keep rolling. And I like to roll my noodles till they're pretty thin, not to where you can see through them, but till they're about 2 or 3 mils in thickness. So I don't like a super thick noodle. I like a thinner noodle, but you want to be able to taste your noodle, obviously. So I'm going to get a knife and I'm going to cut this into fourths so I can work with smaller pieces of dough. Okay. And that's the inside of my noodle dough. See how yellow and rich that is? It'll make great tasting chicken and noodles. And these are farm fresh brown eggs. I know there's a lot of, controversy out that says, oh, they're no different than what you get in the store, but they really do have a richer taste. They are better, I think. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So, I'm just gonna make that into like a pancake, and then just start rolling it. Alrighty. And I cleared my counters and my table so that I can lay these out to dry. Normally what I used to do after I would roll these out, we would let them dry until the edges kind of started to flip up. You'd flip them over, spread a little more flour on it, because as it dries, the flour kind of helps it dry and absorbs into the noodle. But what I'm going to do today, because I do have to go to work after a bit, I'm going to go ahead and try cutting them and letting them dry cut. That way my daughter can bag them up for me. So we'll see. That's an experiment. I always love experimenting and trying new techniques to see how they work. I mean, what do you got to lose? You really can't fail with it. I mean, because it'll dry one way or another. So It just may be a little more gummy to work with as I'm cutting, but a good sharp knife will go right through it. And like I said, this is just a lot of muscle work, just putting your strength into it to work it out till you get the thickness you want. You see the nice rich color in them. These are so good. They're the best. Let's just sprinkle that, because I'm gonna flip it over again. And I wanna make sure it doesn't stick on me. Especially when you start to get close to the desired thickness that you want, you definitely don't want to stick to your surface because it'll start tearing it up and you'll have big holes in it. Which you can still cut them like that, but obviously it's nice to have a nice big round circle. These are actually for my sister for their Thanksgiving dinner. She asked, would you make me some noodles? I'm like, that's definitely a labor of love. So, and I don't think you can probably see here my surface. You can see my surface, but you can't see close up. But I can start to see the background color through my noodles, and they're starting to get a little bit thin to where I want them to be. Almost. Okay, and let's roll these up and take it over there. Well, here are my rolled out noodles, and I have 4 little rings, and these 4 will feed about 2 families or a great big gathering of probably about 20 people. I wanted to show you something. When you clean up your noodles after you make your noodles on your surface here, this is just my recommendation. It's what always has worked for me. I never clean up the surface when I'm done with a wet rag until I take a paper towel or a dry hand towel and I scoop all of this up into the trash. Then I'll take either a flat edge of a spatula or my icing spreader here, whatever the name is for this, and I will come along and scrape the remaining dried on wet product, you know, from where you've rolled it out off, and then I will come behind and use my soapy wet rag to clean off the whole surface. That's just how I do it. Now, you don't have to do it that way. Maybe you have a way that works better, but I learned it the hard way that flour and water make a nasty pasty mess. So I thought, let's try this a different way the next time I made it, and I did that, and I'm like, this is a much easier way to do this rather than making a floury paste on my surface and wiping. So that's just how Mama Lisa does it. Then there's another thing I want to share with you. I know for as many people as there are recipes, there are ways of doing dumplings. Well, myself, I like my dumplings really just made out of this same dough. And all I do is cut them into little tiny squares about an inch or so by about another inch. So they also call them patches, you know, dumplings, whatever you choose to call them. A lot of people make them out of Bisquick dough or canned biscuits. They'll cut them up and make their own dumplings out of that. I don't think there's any right or wrong way. I think it's just all preference. So me personally, I just cut up my egg noodle rounds into little bite-sized pieces, and I call those dumplings. And then also, however you choose to cut your noodle, I mean, that's totally a preference thing too. I'm going to show you 2 different ways that I cut them. the way that my family used to cut them, and then how I like them. So as soon as these dry a little bit more, I will show you how I cut them up. So what I've done is I took the whole round like that, and I made a line across the middle in one long ways. And then I just kind of started slicing them in about, probably about 2.5 inch width strips. And then I am going to stack them up like this and make the edges come together. And I'm going to try to stack all of them of this one round together at the same time, just for sake of time. And what I did is I just left all the flour on them, so that way when I start cutting them, I can scatter them and they'll dry better that way. And what I'm doing is I'm just stacking them all up. Now that's an odd shaped one, but you know, it'll cook just the same. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it on my cutting board. And of course I have a mess going on here, but it is what it is. It just par for the course. And I'm going to just take those and put them on my cutting surface. Then I'm just going to start cutting. I've got a really sharp knife. I just sharpened it again. And I'm just going to go down here and make little thin cuts. And you end up with about 1/4 of an inch wide and about maybe 2 1/4 long. And that is my noodles. And like you can see, they are not uniform in any way, shape, or form, but that is just homemade noodles. That's just how they are. Unless you have a pasta maker that you can run these through, which would be obviously very ideal, but you know, people do it all the time without it, and they're just not going to be uniform, but they'll be fine. As long as, you know, they're close to the same size, so they'll cook evenly. That's really the goal. And I'm not going to cut every little noodle one at a time, but those are a little bit wider. So I'm just going to show you how I do a few of these, because it would take me hours long video to show you how to do all of these. But it's the same idea. Sometimes it gets a little bit tricky to, as you keep moving down the line, to cut them all the same. Now, my family, way back when I first married my ex, they used to cut them down the middle, and they would make them about 1 inch wide and really, really thin. And I think they still do. But I know my sister and her family and my kids, they like to be able to taste their noodle a little bit more. So I'm going to make them about that big. But really it's just preference on how thick and how long you like your noodles, how you cut them. Really, you can see it's just simply an adjustment of your technique and how wide you cut your strips to stack and cut, or if you have, you know, the pasta attachment for your KitchenAid, how wide you decide to put it through there, it's just, you know, all on preference. And definitely you want to keep your hands back out of the way. When you've done something like this so much, you kind of get used to you just move your hands back out of the way. because you can get yourself before you even know you did it. Especially with a nice sharp knife. And like I said, these I did not let dry completely at all before I've cut them. I'm just going to go ahead and cut them and let them dry. So they'll probably sit here for quite a few hours and dry out really well. And then they'll get bagged up, which is just fine. Because really, the idea, you don't want them to be sticking together to each other when you do bag them up. I apologize, my lighting over here isn't the best. I've got the sun coming through my curtain, so it's kind of got lines in the sun there. And those look great. Those look really, they look really good. Just the right size, just to, you know, when you take a bite, you can taste the noodle well. And it's not, you know, like some thin spaghetti or anything. Just a nice size egg noodle. You want to try to separate them because they do start to kind of clump together. Like I said, as you can see, it's not a hard thing to make. It's just labor intensive. It's definitely more of a physical job than a skill level. I mean, obviously now to get your egg and flour ratio, that can be a little bit tricky. As you can see, I started out with about 3 cups of flour in there, and then I did add about another half to 3/4 of the cup. And as I rolled it out, I probably added another 2 cups to it. So in all, for a whole dozen eggs, I probably ended up with about 5 cups of flour completely incorporated into these noodles by the time it's all done. Alrighty, and there's one of our whole rounds. And they look great. Really didn't take all that long to do, honestly. Just muscle. And I'm just going to separate those well so that they'll dry as individual noodles. I'm going to move my little cutting board. And then we're just going to separate those out really nicely. So as they dry, they're not clumped. And that way when you go to put them in your boiling broth, they don't clump up into a ball of dough. Some people like that because they like eating a bowl of dough. Not me. Okay, those look really good. So, I'm going to show you this other one. Now I'm going to cut this. And let's move you over here. And we're going to do that one. Like I said, I'm just going to go right down the middle. And kind of eyeball it about as close to the middle there as I can get. And what I do sometimes is so I remember how big these were and I want them to be uniform. I will take one of the noodles out of the previous cut and I'll just start there. And once you do one, that's all you need. So there you go. And then you can just stack it up as like a template and you can just start cutting from there. There we go. These may be a hair thinner than the other round, but it's not significant. It'll still cook pretty uniform. Okay. And I'm going to take these little end pieces and put them on top, because a lot of times when you have little end pieces, if you don't see them underneath the bigger strips, you don't cut them evenly. Okay. turn that around and stack this on there. And go down there. And I just keep stacking them up until I get them all even. As even as you can. And then just turn it over to where you're kind of the same direction. Alrighty, there's them. And I'm just going to stack them up on top of there and just cut them as I go. These are a little bit thicker pieces, but it's okay. Not going to hurt a thing. Yeah, that one was pitch. You know what? I'm going to cheat here. And I'm going to cut that in half and stack it. About that one. And let's get my little cutting plastic. See? That's why I try to put the little pieces on top, but that's what happens when you get in a hurry. And then I'm going to just cut these. Let's see if we can get our little knife to go through all of these stacked up to make it faster. Yep. It worked. But the trick is to keep cutting all the way through the stack and not thin out on the end to where they're not uniform, you know? If that makes any sense, I'm sure it does. I don't know if you can see, but there's definitely, those are definitely thinner than these by not much at all. I mean, trivial amount. I'm gonna start separating those because they're stacked up so much and they are thinner. Let's see. Yeah, just making sure that I don't have them stuck together because they are thinner a little bit. Yeah, let me get that off there. I try to kind of separate them as I'm going along, so as they're drying, because when they're cut, they're obviously going to dry faster, and I don't want them to start to dry and come together. And this is how we do it by hand, which they've done for ages and ages. And you know, when you've got eggs, flour, salt, and you know, some bouillon, maybe some leftover roast beef or leftover chicken, you got a quick meal. I mean, you know, it may take a little bit of effort, but you know, when you're on a tight budget, or in the case when I was raising my kids, we didn't have a whole lot, so we had to make do with what we had, and oftentimes it just took effort, you know. I always had flour and eggs and salt, so I'd whip up a batch of noodles or cut them out into my little dumplings, and I might have a piece of beef left over from a roast and just threw that in a pot and boiled that down with some onion and seasoning, and I'd have a good hearty meal for my kids that really didn't take but pennies to make. So this is a great skill to have and, you know, to learn. And like I said, it's not really that hard. It's just more labor intensive. But it's worth it. Okay, so there we go. That one's done. And I just have 2 more to go, which won't really take all that long either because this didn't take that long. And I'm just going to separate these because they are all stacked up and kind of sticking. But like I said, I was going to experiment and do these relatively moist and cut them, and it actually worked just great because I left the flour in between the layers, so the flour acted to help lube the noodles up to where they wouldn't stick. So it did work pretty great. And now they can just set and dry really well and get bagged up. some still stuck together there. And that's it. That's how you make egg noodles. Not hard at all. And they are amazing. They taste so good. It is so worth your effort to do it. Let's see. Just making sure I don't have any left stuck together. And then I'll just go through here and kind of toss them to make sure none are stuck. And they're not. They look pretty good. And I don't want to mess with them anymore so that they don't clump up and turn into a little ball. But, well, there you have it. There's 2 little rounds right there. And believe it or not, that does make a decent amount. It really does. That's a nice serving there for a few people. Well, thanks for hanging out with me while I made egg noodles, and I hope you'll give it a try. It's definitely worth the effort, and they taste amazing.